5 minutes, he said. 40 years into 5 minutes. Bit of a challenge. Anyway, we'll give it a go. Now, I've always said I went through more stations than the tilt train. 15 I added them up this morning, and some of those I went away and came back again. It all began for me at the Vincent School of Broadcasting at 504 Little Collins Street in Melbourne. I started a 12-month course on the 21st of October 55, and I finished on the 24th of November 56. Bill Roberts ran the school. He was an old radio man himself, and I paid £47 and 5 shillings for the 12-month course. My first station in the Queen's birthday, or the Australia Day weekend actually, in 1957 was a 3TR sale, and two of the senior announcers there at the time were Gary Ord and Dick Williams, who went on to both of them illustrious careers in the ABC. I filled in for Tom Warren twice at 3CB at Maryborough, but in January 1960 I went to Swan Hill, 3SH. And one of the fellow announcers there was Paul Jennings, who became a very good impersonator and used to do a very good John Howard. In 1961 I went over to 70X in Launceston, and I stayed there 12 months, and that's where I met Max Barringer and his wife Di, who were courting at the time. Back to 3SH Swan Hill in 62-63 to be studio manager. And I was there towards the end of 63 when two 3UZ types turned up in town to do a promotional visit. One was the late John Ford, and John's widow Lynn is here today, and the other was Les Hyde, who is still around, upright and mobile. Just. Anyway, I got into their ears and said, you know, I'm right for big city radio. This is a big thing. And lo and behold, I got a call from Les to say there's a job in the 3UZ newsroom. If you want it, contact the editor, Clive Waters. So I did, and I got the job at 3UZ. They were the halcyon days of UZ, the Greater, Jim Woody Woods, Don Crasher Rainsford, Mr. D, Don Lunn, Alan Lappin, Jeff the Hound Haynes, Aki and Jackie, Dick Herring, and of course Max Barringer. I went up from 3UZ. I wasn't sure whether news was going to be my lot, so I went up and I worked for 2KY in Sydney at the end of 64. The Roosevelt Club was the studios then of 2KY, a very famous club owned by Abe Saffron and full of Americans during the Second World War. I won the New South Wales lottery, so being £6,000 better off, I took off and I did the world tour, the grand tour of Europe, and on my return there were no jobs in Sydney, so I became a temporary bouncer for the Easy Beats and Normie Rowe and Marcy Jones. We went on tour to Newcastle and Adelaide and then to Melbourne. And by the time I got to Melbourne I'd had enough of the rock and roll scene, and I went to the saloon bar of the Windsor Hotel, which was where all the radio people met on a Friday lunchtime. And who should I meet but John Sheed? And Sheed said to me, I think there's a job at 3AW, why don't you get in touch with Bob Quinn? So I got in touch with Bob and I got a job at 3AW. And I worked with Ralph Rickman, Dennis Gibbons, David McGee, Peter James, Jeff Mannion, Artie Lister, and of course Norman Banks. Also in the AW newsroom at the time was Greg Shackleton, who unfortunately lost his life at Ballabo in 75. Anyway, after being at AW for a year and a bit, Ron Fowle came in as the new general manager and decided that John Sheed and myself weren't exactly what the sound he wanted for 3AW, and we were given time to look for another job. John took off pretty briskly, but I stayed almost the entire 3 months until Bob Quinn said, have you ever been to Brisbane? And I said no. He said, well, 4BH are looking for someone up there to do Happiness Is. And I said, oh, all right, still single. Off I drove up to Brisbane, and I started at BH on the 20th of February 1967. And I ran into and worked with Ben Beckinsale, John Taylor, Jim Iliff, Neil Rudd, Peter Hitchener, John Daly, Graham Sherry, Jeff Bradley, Russ Worthington, and the talks programs at the time were run by Ivor Hancock. And among the people who featured in the talks programs were Wendy Mansfield, Don Second, Gabby Horan, Babette Stevens, Jennifer Bloxedge, Father Stephen Freshwater, and the commentators were Greg O'Dwyer, Barry French, Eric Bone, Andrea, and George Lovejoy. By the way, I went into the sales department the first day and I was introduced to a very slim and very younger Bob Hardy. Anyway, 2GB bought 4BH in '69 and decided that the newsroom was the first thing to go as an austerity measure. So we were closed down. It was monitor news in those days. And off I went to the ABC. So down at Corro Drive, where I worked there for just on 12 months. And then I came back because 2GB saw the error of their ways and they reopened the newsroom in January 1971. And I joined it as news producer. I was there from 71 to 73 when I heard on the grapevine, as all of us did, that commercial radio was about to kick off in the UK. So I decided that I would just take my 15-minute audition tape, and off I went. I got to LBC after trying Capital Radio, and Greg Granger was the editor there, and he said, no, I've got enough of you Antipodeans. What I need are more local blokes. So he said, go and see LBC, they're hiring 100. So I got a job at LBC, and as luck would have it, on the 8th of October 73 at 0600 hours in the morning, I read the first bulletin on legal UK commercial radio. It wasn't all fun and games. The Brits weren't too good on commercial radio. They didn't know a lot about it. So we stumbled along. And one of my fellow readers there was Malcolm Rennie. And Malcolm was another victim of Bellbow, as was Greg Shackleton. And one of the things that happened there that I've never forgotten, apart from the attempted abduction of Princess Anne, was that the IRA had a campaign going in London at that time, and they had what they called come-on bombs, where they would set a bomb off, say in Chelsea, and then all the emergency services and the media would arrive, and the second one would go off. And I sent a bloke into that one night, and it scared the hell out of me. After 2 years at LBC, I came back to 4BH. Between 76 and 82, I was editor of Macquarie News Queensland, and we relayed bulletins to 23 stations right around the state. It was the biggest commercial news network at that time. After, at 82, in 1982, I decided, okay.
I remember how to stop you because it's so interesting.
1982, I left BH and I decided to try my hand at television. So I went up to Mount Cootha and started at TVO, Channel O. From 82 to 89, I was involved in their coverage of the QAFL, and I was also afternoon chief of staff. And of course we had a delightful 6 months during Expo 88, which was just fantastic. TVO was collapsing inwards in 1989, and I took a redundancy and I went back into radio at 4BH. But then I ran into one of the arch bastards I ever worked for, and with the result that I only lasted about a year at 4BH, and that was Stafford. Yeah, and then at 4BC from 93 to 96 I was a producer for John Miller and for Wayne Pooh. So that was up to April 96, and I was shown the door at 4BC being, what's the word, over whatever, I've forgotten the term. And that was the end, virtually the end of my career. That was April 96. So that's it. Thank you.